we go.
All right, cool. So hey, again, so the last segment we talked about corporate personhood and why the corporate personhood is important to provide jurisdiction by the United States of America Incorporated over the human beings, where the human beings agree to be United States citizens, where United States citizens are actually subcorporations, creations of the parent corporation, which is the United States of America Incorporated. Now, how they do that is by the birth certificate. When a baby is born, mother signs a birth certificate that gives jurisdiction or gives power of attorney to the United States of America Incorporated to create a subcorporation, and that subcorporation is called the United States citizen. And then the human being agrees to participate or agrees to appear as a United States citizen, and thereby comes under the jurisdiction, the legal jurisdiction under contract, under the United States of America parent corporation. So once the human being agrees to be in that position and give up any natural rights, any sovereign rights, any natural human rights, then that United States of America corporation can play many games to drain the energy, to suck the energy out of the human populace. And the primary way they do that is through what we now know as the central banking system, Federal Reserve banking system. Now, under the Constitution of the United States, only gold and silver coinage shall be used as currency of the land, the legal tender. And that's important because when that currency is put into circulation, gold and silver, there need not be inflation unless the currency is manipulated, as it was in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. There was a lot of manipulation of the currency, which caused bank failures and things. But generally, between 1800 and almost 1900, there was pretty close to zero inflation. There was very little inflation. And that's because gold and silver was the main medium of currency. Now, of course, the Federal Reserve Bank will say that that caused a lot of problems, and that the Federal Reserve Bank solved those problems by creating what we know as the fiat currency, which is Federal Reserve notes. But if we look carefully at history, and I'm not going to go into all of the details, you can research that, but the details of history will show that a lot of the depressions that led up to the creation of the Federal Reserve banking system and the abolition of gold and silver currency, they were manipulated, they were created for that purpose. And why is that so important? Why have several presidents wanted to eliminate that fiat currency system, that Federal Reserve central banking system, that fake money that fake money system? They wanted to eliminate that, and those presidents lost their lives while in office. And the means of those lost lives, those assassinations or deaths in office, are debatable, but nonetheless, we can see that that's what happened. The reason that it is important for the central banking, why that is such a tremendous tool for draining the energy of the people, is this. The central bankers, let me back up a little bit. The central bankers issue currency as debt. Means in order for Federal Reserve notes to exist, or bank credit on account, in order for it to exist, someone must borrow that money from the bank. If that money is not borrowed, it does not exist. So when we look at our current economy here in 2012, the beginning of 2012, any Federal Reserve notes that exist in circulation, any money on account in a bank, all of that money was borrowed from the bank. It had to have been borrowed, otherwise it would not exist. It did not exist before it was borrowed. When someone goes into the bank and signs on the dotted line and gets money in the account, the money is then and there invented. It's conjured out of nothing. If a homeowner gives a note to the banker to buy a home, okay, I agree to pay so much money at a certain time, they take that note from the homeowner and deposit it into an account as a cash deposit. And then the bank writes a check against that note to pay the previous owner. And the buyer then is obligated, according to the terms of the contract, to pay again and again to live in the home that they've already paid for with their note. That is, that's how it works. So the bank is never out any money, but nonetheless the homeowner must pay and pay and pay to satisfy the obligations of a contract that they unwittingly got themselves trapped into. That's one of the mechanisms, the home buying mechanism. It works for buying of cars and lines of credit on account. But here's another aspect to that, and that is that when the borrower goes to the bank and borrows money, suppose 1 million of us each borrow $100,000, and then we have to pay back that $100,000 with 10% interest. Now, if there were only 1 million of us, just for the sake of argument, in a given area, and it's a closed system, then each of us has to pay that bank back $110,000, 10% interest. Where are we going to get that $10,000? We have to take it from one another because it doesn't yet exist anywhere else. So a certain percentage of us simply cannot pay that money back because we didn't borrow enough from the bank to pay back the interest. We're stuck in a system that creates poverty. It must create poverty because those of us who cannot pay back that debt then are left on the street. We don't have money to buy goods. We don't have money to pay rent. Now, someone may argue, well, I don't borrow money. I simply work for someone else, and they pay me, so I don't borrow money. And I think that's great. But whoever it is that you worked for had to borrow the money, or they had to earn it from someone that borrowed the money. So that money then is of a limited supply, but the interest is more than the money that's in circulation, so we can't all pay it back, and that's what creates poverty and creates homelessness. And that system simply has to be abolished. But then, what are we going to replace it with? So we'll talk about that. What are we going to do about that system? This corporate personhood and this central banking that enslaves us to debt, which is exactly what it does. What are we going to do about that? So we'll talk about that in the next video.